All right, let's do some really basic and fundamental stuff for the guys that are just learning about tuning and setting up engines and troubleshooting and diagnostics. Let's talk about cylinder balance testing, because this really is one of the fundamentals. So the basic concept goes like this. All else being equal, a multi-cylinder engine is going to have each cylinder carrying an equal amount of the load. So if you've got 2-cylinder, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder engine, whatever it is, each one should be equal in the way it functions as the engine is running. Now, if you come across an engine that's got like a dead miss, or it's not running quite right, a little sluggish, one of the first things you want to do is a cylinder balance test. And it sounds like it's an exotic deal, but in some cases you need no tools at all, and in most cases you can get by with a test light, a simple test light. So there are countless variations to this. I'm going to try to cover as many variables as possible in this video, but you should be able to put together the knowledge you need to go ahead and practice this on your own car. So the first method of doing a cylinder balance test is something that I do instinctively, automatically, anytime I set up an engine. I do a tune-up on an engine or a fresh motor, just fire it up for the first time. And you want to make sure all 8 cylinders, or however many cylinders there are hitting evenly. So now, this method will only work if you've got headers. Will not work with exhaust manifolds, only headers. And it requires no tools at all. It requires your finger and a little spit. All right, so now I'm going to do this with the engine off, because you won't be able to hear me over it. So I'll just walk you through it and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. So the way you do this particular test, you're going to check the heat on each individual header tube. And it's really simple. You take a little spit, you put it on your finger, like so, and you swipe it across each header tube, just like that. Okay? You want to do it a couple of inches away from the head, because you don't really want the radiant heat from the cylinder head affecting your measurement. So go as far away from the head as you can when you do this. So you're going to get one of 3 results, and they're going to tell you what the deal is. The first result, the best result, is you're going to wet your finger, swipe it over the header tube, and you swipe it quickly like that. You will not get burnt. Don't worry, your tender little digits will be just fine. I've been doing this for 50 years. The best possible result is as you swipe your finger over the header tube, you're going to feel it sizzle between your finger and the tube. And when you look, there won't be anything. No trace of spit, no wet, okay? That cylinder is healthy, it's firing, it's carrying its load, it's doing its job. The next possible result will be, you'll see the swipe like this, but it'll fade kind of rapidly. Within, let's say, 2 or 3 seconds, it'll be gone. So it's not instant. Like the best way, you go like this, you feel a little sizzle, and it's gone, right? If you still see it like that, and it takes a second or 2 for it to dissipate, that means that cylinder is firing weak. Now remember, the idea here is to compare each cylinder in the running engine to each other cylinder in the running engine. So let's just say you do, on this 8-cylinder engine, you have 7 that sizzle and you have 1 that slowly fades. Well, that 1 cylinder that slowly fades is weak. It's not carrying its load equally. It could be, likely it's not an ignition issue, but if it fades like that and it's just firing weak, it could be improper fuel mixture, it could be low compression for whatever reason, but it shows you that there's a problem there. What you want to do is let the engine run for another couple of minutes and try it again. If it's still cold-ish, right, then start tearing things apart, or at least start going to the next step as far as troubleshooting that particular cylinder. But at least you isolated a weak one. The third possible result is you do this, and 20 seconds later, it's still wet. You touch the tube, it's cold. Okay, that cylinder is not firing. No action, nobody home. It's most likely an ignition problem. Usually not a fuel problem, but most likely an ignition problem where the spark plug isn't firing at all. No heat is being, sent through that tube, and that spit will just sit there forever. All right, so yeah, you don't need an engine running to show you this. I think I covered it with words. So that's a basic test, and like I said, I do this instinctively, and I've done it every single time I've ever built an engine. Any time that I've ever done a tune on an engine, changed anything on it, you always check the cylinders to make sure that they're all even. Okay, one other way to do this too, a temperature gun. Right? I mean, you can accomplish pretty much the same thing with a temperature gun, but they're not always handy. They're not always convenient, and especially like if you're out and about and you want to troubleshoot real quick to see what's going on, you may not have one of these. But yeah, you can point a heat gun, a temperature gun at, I call this a heat gun. You could point this temperature gun at each individual cylinder and see which ones are hot and which ones are cold. This would be a better fine-tuning implement. So in other words, let's say, assume you've got 8 running cylinders, you can find differences in the temperature between the cylinders and better balance, however you would balance it through the fuel system generally, to get a more equal reading. But again, we're just doing basic cylinder balance testing here. Okay, so now let's go to the next set of circumstances. Your engine's got exhaust manifolds, or you can't get at the header tubes, or you're just looking to more closely pinpoint and troubleshoot what the problem is. And so now we're going to start removing spark from each individual cylinder to find the one or ones that don't react, and then again, you can continue your troubleshooting from that point. So before we get into that, we have to talk about ignition wires. Right? Now, there is never any excuse to have jumbled and rat's nest of ignition wires. Your ignition wires should always be laid out neatly and as much in order as possible. So here, I'll show you an example. On this engine, we've got the spark plug wires for this bank laid out neatly and in order. So I know that this is cylinder number 1, this is 3, this is 5, and this is 7. Then I've got a similar thing on the other side with 2, 4, 6, 8. Now we do this because look where all your wires are here. They move to all different locations on the cap, but here's how they feed into the engine. So you do this because as you're killing each individual cylinder, you want to know which ones they are. You don't want to have to go hunting around. So it's important to have your plug wires routed neatly, and you want to route them neatly also because you don't want them possibly cross-firing against each other, inductive spark between the wires. So you want to keep them as separated and as neat as possible. On this engine, on this side, it's very easy. On an engine with a rear-mounted distributor, I do the same thing. So that as soon as they come off the cap, they go into order, and I'm able to diagnose, troubleshoot immediately, depending on what I find here, which cylinder it is, without having to go and hunt around, okay, which one is this? So always keep them in the order that they appear on the bank on the wiring. All right, so let me sit down and I can better show you what I'm talking about with grounding spark. Okay, now there are countless variations to this depending on the type of ignition system that you have, the type of cap, the type of wires. So what I'll do is I'll try to cover as many bases as possible, but you may need to improvise for your specific application. Now, the first method of killing each individual cylinder doesn't involve grounding the spark plug wire or the spark. It involves just removing the spark. Now, this is the simplest way, and it doesn't require any tools, and it's damage-free. There's no chance of doing any damage. And it's just simply taking each, with the engine off, you take each spark plug wire and unseat it, and then lay it just gently back in position. So they're just sitting on top of the cap like that. All right. And now you're going to fire the motor up, and one by one, you're going to pull each wire off and see which one doesn't make a difference. Now, when you're doing this, you should see a nice healthy spark, like a snapping spark. If you don't, if you see a very faint spark, then it's possible that your misfire is because of a weak coil or a bad coil wire or not enough voltage getting to the coil. So you want to make sure that as you pull each wire away, before the cylinder drops dead, before the running cylinders react, you want to be able to pull the wire away from the cap slightly and hear and see a snapping spark, a bright spark. You should be able to go a quarter to a half inch away from the cap and still get that spark. If you don't, well, like I said, you know you've got problems elsewhere. And you're going to go around the cylinder, you're going to go on the engine as it's running, removing each cylinder to see which one doesn't react, or ones don't react. And this is again where you get into having the wires in order, because let's just say you pull this one off and this one off, okay, and there's no reaction to the engine. You're only running on 6. If you find by following the loom, like I showed you on those 2 engines, that those 2 cylinders are next to each other, the ones that are dead, most likely you've got a bad head gasket. It's sharing fire between the 2 cylinders. So keep that in mind. Now, why isn't this the best way to do it? Because your results may vary. Now, it's always good to check the quality of spark by pulling a wire away and watching and hearing it jump. But if you've got a plug that's fouled, either gasoline or oil fouled, and that's where your misfire or your dead cylinder is coming from, by doing what I'm showing you here, by pulling the wires partially off the cap, what you could be doing is cleaning up the plug and giving you a bad result. Because when you create a gap, let's say from the spark plug, from the distributor cap to the spark plug wire, when you create a gap that the spark has to jump, you're actually amplifying the spark. And what will happen is it'll clean up and start firing a spark plug that's like fouled, mostly fouled. If it's dead, it's dead. You're not going to bring it around. But if it's just wet and it's not firing because it's wet, when you pull this or you fire the engine up with the wires barely in the cap like that, there's going to be a little gap that spark's going to jump. It'll amplify the spark and it'll clean up the plug that's giving you a problem. So that's one possible liability of doing it this way. But this is the most common way to do it. It's the easiest way to do it. It takes no tools, no brains, and you can do this at any time. And again, it's good to check the spark quality. All right, so we have the possibility of the gap cleaning up the plug and thus fouling your result or not giving you a complete test. So the next step and the most effective way, period, to do a cylinder balance test is by grounding each individual wire with a test light, simple 12-volt test light. And you want to make sure that the tip is clean, right? It's clean and it's sharp. You don't want to do this with a dull point or an especially fat test light. You want the thinnest probe you can get, the pointiest, thinnest probe you can get. So again, with the engine running, and of course you want to ground this either to the engine itself or to the negative on the battery. With the engine running, you're going to probe each individual cylinder one at a time and see which one doesn't make a difference. Easiest way to do this is with, hang on, I set up a demonstration. Okay, easiest way to do this is with this style spark plug that has the male and a straight boot. Because with this, all you're going to do with the engine running, all you're going to do is take the test light and slip it between the boot and the wire. You just get down in there like that. And as soon as the probe gets close enough to the metal contact on the wire for that spark to jump, it'll kill that cylinder. You're just going to go around each one. There's no damage possible doing it this way. But not all spark plug wires have that type of end, which is a shame because it's the easiest end to work with. Most of them are going to have this style, and it's either going to be male or female, you know, where this is a male that plugs into the cap, or you're going to have a female like these where the cap plugs into the wire. Is that right? Yeah. All right. So a couple of different ways to do this. And it depends really on your level of caring. Okay. All right. I've seen people attempt to do cylinder balance testing this way, grounding the cylinders with the test light, by installing a piece of rubber hose, rubber vacuum hose, like this, between the cap, the post on the cap. All right, so you would put your vacuum hose in the cap, and then you would put the wire on top of it like this, okay? So that now the spark, this would work with certain types of vacuum hose because there's carbon in the hose, and the carbon conducts electricity. So some people will do a test like this, where they'll bridge the distance between the wire and the cap with a length of hose. I never do it this way. This is a silly way to do it. First, it will only work on a real HEI type of ignition. You're going to need 30 or 40,000 volts for it to actually function this way. And the hose has to be the right composition. It's got to have enough carbon in it that it actually conducts electricity. There's all different types of hoses with all different types of carbon content. So this is an inconsistent way to do it. I'm only showing you this because if you look up cylinder balance testing, somebody's going to show you to use a length of rubber hose to make that connection. And yeah, no, don't do it. It's not the way to go. If you want to do it damage-free, in other words, you don't want to probe through the top of the spark plug wire, if you can't get in there like you do on this type of wire, and you don't want to damage this type of boot, then what you can do, get this stuff out of the way, what you can do is take a length of wire. Now you could use, I've used paper clips in the past, thin paper clips. But you could take a length of wire like this stainless safety wire, and you could plug it into the cap, fold it over like so, and then install your wire. Okay, so now, oh my God, I lost it. Where'd it go? Popped out. You take your wire, stick it in the cap like so, and then plug your plug wire into it. And now you've got a handy dandy probe that you could touch and ground each individual cylinder without damaging the boot. All right, so those are some ways that you can use a test light, a common test light, and ground each individual cylinder without doing any damage to the boot. If you're working on somebody else's engine, I highly recommend you do that. Now me, if I'm working on one of my own, I generally don't bother. I'll take the probe, and again, you make sure it's pointy and you make sure it's as small diameter as you can get. And I'll take the probe, and with the engine running, I'll just go right to the center of the wire, just like that, and poke it through. And that'll ground the cylinder. If the rubber is good, if it's healthy, right, still fresh and pliable, that hole will close up immediately and you won't have any problem. If the rubber is played out, you'll put the hole through the top of the boot and it'll stay there. You'll always have a little bit of hole there. At that point, you should be replacing the plug wires anyway because they're done. You can put a little bit of black silicone over the top of it, so if you make the hole with the probe, you can seal it with a little silicone and you're good to go. So let's do this. I have this Jeep out here. Let's fire this thing up and actually go through a balance test and see what we find with it. All right, so with that, let's do an actual cylinder balance test. I've got this Jeep here, and it runs good, there's no problems, but let's just go through the motions anyway. So we're going to ground our test light. And we're going to go to each individual cylinder and ground it. We're going to probe right through the center of the cap. Listen for a change. You hear it? Alright, that's a good one. That's a good one. one's a little weak. It's making a change, but not as much as the other. It's another good one. That one's really carrying a load. Sounds good. I'll talk to the first one. So in that case, we're hitting on all 6. We're not hitting exactly evenly on all 6. A couple of them were slightly weaker than the others, which, as far as I'm concerned, is to be expected. It's got 270,000 miles on it. So you'd expect a cylinder or two to be a little bit weaker than the others. Now, if I was concerned about it, I would be pulling the spark plugs, and at this point you go into the next step. You're going to look at the plugs, you're going to do a compression test or a leak test. You're going to go through all of the troubleshooting steps to determine why those cylinders are a little on the weak side. But again, they all hit. If there was a dead one there, there would have been no change when we hit the probe. So for me, for that Jeep, as a driver, it's fine. But you get the general idea how it's done and what you're looking for. So that's it. Like I said, I tried to cover as many different variations as possible. Of course, I'm showing you on a conventional distributor ignition. So if you've got a distributorless, coil unplugged, that sort of thing, at that point you have to, if you can unplug each individual coil, you do it that way. If you can't unplug each individual coil, then you have to go to the injectors and you start unplugging each individual injector to give you the same basic effect. But basically all you're doing is you're killing one cylinder at a time until you find the one that doesn't react or reacts the least, or you're looking for a pair that are having a problem that are next to each other, head gasket type of issue. But I think I gave you enough for the basics that you can go ahead and figure out how to go about it on your own engine and know what you're looking for when you start probing away. Cylinder balance testing made easy. I like the spit method the best. I'll see you tomorrow.